What's happening in our country? Seriously, look around you. Crime is raging out of control in our streets. Our people are desperate that they'll have to lose their homes because of rising inflation and interest rates the government promised would never happen. People are losing loved ones at record rates to violent crime and drug overdoses. And families who've been locked down for 2 years because of COVID are now locked down at airports when they try to get away for a small vacation. Everything feels broken. Oh, I just offended Justin Trudeau. He gets very angry when I talk about these problems. He thinks that if we don't speak about them out loud, that Canadians will forget that they exist. He said this to me in a very angry speech right before Christmas, where he told 2,000 Liberal lobbyists and political staffers and consultants who'd paid $500 to listen to him speak that Canadians have never had it so good. And you know what? For the people in that room, he's absolutely right. They have never had it so good. The $1,000 a day consultants at McKinsey have never had it so good. In fact, the consulting contracts that he's given up have gone up 100% in the 8 years since he took office. Justin, these people are very grateful to you. That's why they are donating so much to your party. The lobbyists, whose contracts have also increased by 100%. Justin, they've never had it so good either. All of the political staffers around the Hill that are giving out these contracts to their long-term friends, they've never had it so good either. And with your $6,000 a night hotel rooms, you've never had it so good yourself, Justin. But let me tell you something, Justin. There is pain in the faces you do not see. There is suffering in the voices you do not hear. And there is distress and even chaos in the places you do not go. If you don't believe me, come with me over to the local grocery store in East End, Ottawa, where I was last night, where a 60-year-old plus cook came up to me with tears in his eyes to tell me he has to delay his retirement. But you know the thing that really broke him? That he can no longer afford the very ingredients to cook at home that he works with in his job at work. Justin, if you don't believe me, come to Northern Ontario and ask the elderly woman who lives in the cold because your carbon tax has made it too expensive for her to heat her home. If you don't believe me, Justin, come speak to the students who live in homeless shelters while they go to school, because the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Toronto after 8 years of your leadership is $2,500 a month. That's more than a 100% increase since you took office, and you've done absolutely nothing to incentivize the construction of new and affordable homes for our young people. If you don't believe me, Justin, go to the food banks, where 1.5 million people go to eat in a given month. Stay around long enough. You might hear from some of the people who come to the food bank asking for help getting medical assistance and dying, not because they're sick, but because they're too poor and too miserable after 8 years of your leadership to go on living like this. If you don't believe me, Justin, go talk to the families of the 30,000 people who've lost a loved one to drug overdoses after you favored policies that flooded our streets with heroin and fentanyl, and you tied the hands of our police and prevented them from doing anything about it. After you failed to hold the scumbag corporations who brought these drugs to our streets accountable. Companies like McKinsey, Mr. Trudeau, companies to whom you continue to give $100 million worth of contracts. Mr. Trudeau, if you don't believe me, go to the now permanent encampments that have taken over large parts of formerly prosperous and bustling communities in our cities like Vancouver, Toronto, and Peterborough. If you don't believe me, take a trip to the city transit, Mr. Trudeau, in Toronto, where 40 homeless people are forced to spend the night because your policies have made it impossible for them to get a home.
It's really hard hearing that laundry list of issues that are going on in this country right now. If you didn't see the flags in the background and you didn't hear the city names, you would think that this is a war-torn country that's in absolute poverty. I went to school over 20 years ago, and I could get a room for $300 a month. $2,500 a month in Toronto, and students are staying in homeless shelters because they can't afford a room, but they want an education. And Trudeau seems to think everything's fine.
Canada is not broken.
No problems here. This isn't the Canada that I recognize. This isn't the Canada that I grew up in. And this is certainly not the Canada that I want to die in.
This isn't the Canada I grew up in. This isn't the Canada I want our son to grow up in. I'm filled with absolute despair when I hear Pierre talk about stuff like this, because I know it's true. I see it in the city we live in. I see it when I speak to family members. I have a family member who's a few years younger than me, was saving up before COVID to get a house. She had like $150,000 in the bank, was starting to look at houses. COVID hit, couldn't buy because of the bidding wars, and now she doesn't even know if she'll ever own a house.
Canada is not broken.
She still has all that money. She has a good job. She probably makes $60,000 to $70,000 a year, but she can't afford a house. She's in her 30s and is living at home with her parents, and she's just lost hope. And for what?
Canada is not broken.
Sometimes you'll hear millennials referred to as the lost generation because we're not hitting those milestones that we should be able to hit at our age. People aren't able to, find meaningful relationships and get married. People aren't able to purchase a house. People aren't able to have kids because they can't afford it.
Canada is not broken.
What are we working for? What are we doing in this version of Canada?
The waste that goes on inside the government. You have projects that exceed what you would, typically spend at home by more than 80%. Just because.
Canada is not broken.
You have greedy unions that are so entitled and act like children, like the PSAC union, which is the Public Service Alliance out of Ottawa. They're asking for a 47% wage increase over 3 years. How tone deaf are you? Well, private companies who are all having a hard time, their employers are going to be lucky if they get any increases. I worked in private for most of my life. If you got a 1 or 2% increase, you were grateful. And there's no inflation increase. That's performance. So for these unions that are continually asking double-digit increases, and never mind 47%, they're just completely clueless. But it's all in line with the top down. They seem to think that money grows on trees and you can spend it however you like, and it doesn't matter.
Canada is not broken.
Meanwhile, we, the Canadian taxpayer, are footing the bill. And it's not right, and Canadians really need to wake up and see what's going on.
Canada is not broken.
We as Canadians need to hold our government accountable. They work for us. We need to tell them, write your MP, write them an email, write them a letter, make an appointment, and speak to them in person. We need to tell them that this is not acceptable, and we will no longer stand for it.
And if you're one of these listeners that have the unfortunate luck of having an NDP MP, that's even more important for you to write to them. Because again, I've seen this in the comments. Everyone wants a snap election to be called. That only happens if there's a non-confidence vote to kick Trudeau out. And that only happens if the NDP vote against them. And the only reason they're going to do that is if they are feeling that they're being made to look more foolish by sticking with Trudeau than by breaking away. So if you have an NDP member of parliament, write them, be very angry in your letter, and tell them that you've had enough. Because the whole country has certainly had enough.
If you don't believe me, Mr. Trudeau, get on one of those trains and talk to the people who will tell you the story of a woman who was stabbed in the head and face on a Spadina streetcar just south of Bloor Street. She was taken to hospital with life-altering injuries. These are not one-off stories, Justin. Crime is up 32% since you took office. Violent gang crime up 92% after 8 years in office. You are responsible for the criminal code, for the borders that bring in the illegal guns. You are responsible for our national police force. And after 8 years, you have given Canadians cities that are turning into crime zones. This is your record, Mr. Trudeau. Meanwhile, illegal border crossings have exploded, crossings that were almost unheard of when you took office. This is 8 years. You told us that better was always possible, and yet everything is worse, and you blame everyone else. And we know what you will do this session of Parliament. You will divide to distract. You'll try to make people afraid of each other, because you think that if an average Canadian is afraid of his neighbor, he'll forget that he can't feed himself or pay the rent. You'll try to take all of the responsibility off of yourself and to put it on others. You'll claim you have nothing to do with any of these files, as though, as a federal prime minister, you're not responsible for the federal criminal code. As a federal prime minister, you're not responsible for the chaotic federal airports. That as a federal prime minister, you're not responsible for the $500 billion of federal debt that you have added that led to a 40-year high in inflation. If you're not responsible for any of these things, if you can't do anything about it, then why don't you get out of the way and let someone lead who can?
Mr. Poilievre might choose to undermine our democracy by amplifying conspiracy theories. He might decide to run away from journalists when they ask him tough questions.
Just a fast question. You know me. Yes. We spoke in the past in the summer. Remember me? I said, Prime Minister, a fast question on Tamara Lynch. You preached the whole wild world about freedoms. How come freedom fighters for the convoy are still in jail?
He might decide to run away from journalists when they ask him tough questions.
Why? Prime Minister, any answers? Any answers for disrupting the lives of so many Canadians for the last 20 years? Prime Minister, any answers? Please answer the people of Canada. Wow, that's very a coward.
Oh, they are pushing the plan to hide Mr. Trudeau.
He might decide to run away from journalists when they ask him tough questions.
So, Alexa for Rebel News, and I'm currently in Montreal. And tonight we received a tip that Mr. Trudeau was in Outremont for having a dinner with maybe co-worker or friend. So we ran on the scene to see what is happening, and what you can see behind me, police is there all around the restaurant. They have a lot of citizens who are asking questions. I'm gonna take the chance to ask as well my question to them. Let's check it out.
I decide to run away from journalists when they ask him tough questions.
And quite frankly, I won't call it a media organization, your group of individuals need to take accountability for some of the polarization that we're seeing in this country. And I think Canadians are cluing into the fact that there is a really important decision we take about the kind of country we want to see. And I salute all extraordinary hardworking journalists that put science and facts at the heart of what they do and ask me tough questions every day, but make sure that they are educating and informing Canadians from a broad range of perspectives, which is the last thing that you guys do.
Away from journalists when they ask him tough questions. That's how he brands himself. That's his choice. But when he says that Canada is broken, that's where we draw the line. But I don't accept Canadians and politicians that talk down our country. Let me be very clear. Well, let me be very clear for the record. Canada is not broken.
A leader takes responsibility when things go wrong. A leader takes responsibility when things go wrong. A leader takes responsibility when things go wrong. And this Prime Minister has consistently avoided taking any responsibility for this sordid mess.